Chapter 19, Lecture D. This will conclude Chapter 19 lecture today. Couple items. There is no Chapter 19 quiz. I looked through there and I realized I didn't have a Chapter 19 quiz because it's getting ready for the test, so no Chapter 19 quiz for you guys. There is a Chapter 19 reaction quiz. It's over 14 points in the Treaty of Versailles. So make sure you read that, complete that accurately, fully, and be very specific on it, please. Thank you. That one will be assessed by the university, okay? I mean, I'm still grading it, but that's something I want to show that I'm teaching you some good things. Secondly, the study guide and the multiple choice questions are on the classroom. I put those out there for you so you can kind of study, look through them. I don't always put the multiple choice out there, but because of all the snow and just the crazy schedule, I put that out there. Test is Monday. I will be gone here at Rockport, but I will still have it available and ready to go for you guys. I will grade it when I get back, so there'll be a delay on the testing. But the test will be Monday. We will get through chapters 20 probably by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'll post all the chapter 20 stuff probably next week. And then we'll try to get caught back up. Chapter 21 lecture series will probably be entirely online for all those people here at Rockport and elsewhere. I'll have it posted. It'll be a link. So chapter 21, which we'll get through next week, will all be entirely online. So there'll be a little bit of self-pacing here. I've got the grades up to date, I think, now for the most part. If you're not here at Rockport, I've got those upgraded or updated in a Excel sheet here. So we're tracking right along. I've almost got everything caught up. But we've got chapter 19 to finish. Test material will be chapter 16 through 19. I did not include chapter 15 really in the questions at all because it was more of just an informative thing as a book into the last class to get us set up. So, all right. Who is an American? Yesterday we ended talking about color line, race. We're going to continue on with that. So who is an American on slide number 4? W.E. Du Bois and the revival of black protest. He helped create the NAACP. Du Bois, I believe, graduated, I think, was it from Harvard? He had a pretty good education degree. He launched legal battles over the 14th and 15th Amendments and their implementation, meaning he was arguing they weren't being implemented. People were losing rights because of Jim Crow laws. But his big product is the NAACP, the National Advancement of Colored People. If you don't know what it is, it's basically a giant organization created by him to advocate rights for African Americans. And it still exists to this day. Very prominent, very powerful organization and a lot of sway. But he is the creator of it. If you had to ask what his probably biggest role was, it's probably helped create that. He also bridged some barriers at the college level. Closing ranks, wartime language inspired blacks. So they thought, hey, freedom, democracy, these elements sound great. We want them. Unfortunately, African Americans will be denied some of these liberties even during the war. Though they served only in segregated units, they are often going to be cooks or very custodial type jobs. The Navy initially will bar them altogether. And so African Americans who want to serve, who do serve, will find their careers in the military very limited to very mundane jobs. They're not going to get the good jobs. And they're always going to be segregated. They're not going to be integrated with whites. During this period, there's an event called the Great Migration. What the Great Migration, in short, was a mass movement of African Americans from the north or from the south to the north. And this is going to be because of the war in all reality. There was due to a decrease in immigration and increased wartime production, black labor and opportunities so they needed labor. While a lot of the white men are going to go off to fight or enlist in the military, several blacks will obviously do that as well, but the greater capacity is that they're going to go work factories in the north. On the eve of World War I, 90% of the African American population still lived in the South. Between 1910 and 1920, 500,000 blacks left the South. That is a significant amount of people. It's not all of the society, but it's a huge chunk of African Americans will move north. And they're going to move to new areas in the north. Primarily, the areas they're going to move to: Chicago, population more than doubled during this period. The new black presence compelled demands for change and inspired by the war created a racial tinderbox that needed an incident to trigger an explosion. We'll talk about that more in a second. Chicago gets a lot of African Americans, but the other area besides Chicago, Detroit, and then New York. If you think about today, what three cities have a heavy minority population: Chicago, Detroit, New York, and specifically in New York, Queens area, Harlem. Those areas are going to see a huge increase in African American influence. The other thing is, these African Americans move north. Are they going to be welcomed into white gated communities or white communities? No. They're going to create their own communities on the outskirts or areas in the city that are deemed for them. Next slide. So who is an American Five? Race, violence, North and South. In 1919, more than 250 people died in riots in urban North United States. Most of this violence will be centered in Chicago. One incident, very, very famous, is the drowning or a beach incident. Drowning by white babes of a black teenager who accidentally crossed the unofficial dividing line on the beach. So in short, that sentence makes no sense, but essentially, a black boy was swimming in Lake Michigan, comes up on the beach, accidentally comes up on the white portion of the beach. These white kids, angry, mad about it, I think they end up drowning him. Of course, what's this set off? Race riots, right? The blacks are upset, whites are upset. 38 people will die, more than 500 will be injured in this series of riots over this incident on the beach. Very, very sad reality, but this shows you how much that's tinderbox. And this is post-war, 1919, but this shows you that the racial issues, even in the North, it's very tender. Now, Northerners were open to blacks, but that doesn't mean they were ready to give them all free opportunity, free access to everything, etc. Tulsa riots in 1921, when more than 300 blacks were killed and over 10,000 left homeless after a white mob, including political and National Guardsmen, burned an all-black section of the city to the ground. That's pretty drastic. It's one of the worst events as far as riots is concerned. It was all started over one like he said, she said event, right? African Americans are blamed for things often that they are not guilty of, and the reality is they are heavily persecuted. During this period, if you take my other American history classes, I always mention him briefly, and he's mentioned briefly here in the book goes a little more detail, but I'm not going to go into him. It's a guy named Marcus Garvey, or the rise of Garveyism. He led a movement from African independence and black self-reliance. He was advocating, he was Jamaican by birth, of moving Africans back to Africa, resettlement. He's very theatrical. If you look at pictures of him, he often wears a uniform, funny furry hat type stuff. Kind of a crazy guy. He's bringing back that resettlement concept of moving African Americans back to Africa. The reality is that these Africans have any really know anything about living in Africa? No. It'd be like, Dalton, what's your family history? Where's the bulk of your family from? Do you know?
What side?
Your dad's side. We'll go your dad's side.
Half Native American, half
from Iowa?
Scotland.
Scotland? Okay. Ireland, Scotland. Okay. It'd be like, hey, you're going to go live on a reservation now. Does that make sense to you? My family's heavily German. Anyone here German? Okay, it's like, hey, Zach, you and me, we're going to go to Germany tomorrow. We're going to live there the rest of our life out on the farm. What's that look like? We have no idea, right? We probably smart enough we'll get by, just like you could get by, Dalton. But the reality is, they don't know African traditions. They don't know the language. They might have some heritage, but they're not going to know it. So obviously, the Garveyism is short-lived again. He also gets convicted of mail fraud and deported from the United States. So he's a short-lived figure. Okay, 1919. So we've talked about World War I a lot in detail. I could go in for days about it. Obviously, trench warfare was devastating. It's a worldwide upsurge in revolutionary feel at this point, produced a counter-availing mobilization by opponents of radical change. Despite Allied attempts to overturn the Soviet Union, it survived. What very few realize in 1919, actually 1918, 1919, somewhere there, the Allied powers went into Russia for a short period. They supported the whites, the former supporters of the monarchy. The reds, which makes sense, are the Bolsheviks or the communists. There's a civil war going on in Russia. Ultimately, the Allies will stay out of it. Who wins that 1919 Civil War battle in Russia? Well, I'll give you a hint. The communists, right? The Bolsheviks. And that's where we get the term red associated often with it, all that stuff. But they win. And the Soviet Union will be created and will be thriving and will be, well, I don't need to tell you any more about the Soviet Union. You guys, most of you should already have a basic understanding of them. They're very strict governance, their socialist ways, their limitations on many, many things. Okay, so 1919 sees the creation of the Soviet Union and its endurance. Upheaval in America, flu epidemic, the Spanish influenza. You actually go to Fort Riley, Kansas, where I will be this weekend. There's a giant monument dedicated to the victims of the 1919 flu. 20 million will die worldwide, 700,000 Americans. More people die from the flu in from the flu during this period than Americans died during World War I. Attorney General's mailbox will also be bombed. There'll be labor strikes. So post-World War in America is kind of crazy. You have a giant flu outbreak. There is a fever of revolution in Europe that is put down mostly, but the Soviet Union has a major revolution. Anarchists are trying to make an impact in the United States. The Attorney General's mailbox is literally blown to shreds. His name was Palmer. This leads to a lot of fear in the United States. And there's going to be labor strikes, people advocating for more money, changes in the workforce. This is all going to culminate in what's known as the Red Scare. So what the Red Scare is, the first short-lived, intense period of political intolerance inspired the post-war strike wave and the social tensions and fears generated by the Russian Revolution. The other thing that can't be underscored, one reason people did not like the Soviets or the communists, what did they do to the royal family?
They assassinated them?
They killed them, right? They point-blank shot them. This is seen as immoral, degenerative, very, very uncivilized. Palmer raid, so after the Attorney General's mailbox is bombed in this 1919, Palmer, the Attorney General, is going to authorize a bunch of raids that's going to impound on civil liberties. People will be deported, people found guilty. Did they ever find out the actual people? Probably not. This is going to lead to the creation of one of the most powerful organizations in the United States government for about 50 years, and that's the FBI. Under Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover will be part of these raids or this new wave of espionage and protecting the country, and that is a direct result of this. Dealt a blow to the radical and labor organizations of all kinds and to keep the status quo. People aren't going to want any more union strikes, etc. So all the progressive movement that had gained, it's going to come to a screeching halt now. We're tired of change. We're good. We're going to get back to what we call normal activities. The Socialist Party will crumble under the weight of governmental repression for the next decade and will be non-existent almost. You'll see a resurgence in the 30s because of the Great Depression, but the reality is this is going to be a very tense post-war America. 1919-2. Wilson at Versailles. Wilson had advocated towards the end of the war what he called 14 points. 14 key points that he thought would secure peace through our time and no more war in the world. He had circulated this in Europe. The European countries, probably mostly to appease him, and let him do it. The Germans got sniffed out or got word of 14 points. If you read 14 points, or when you read 14 points, because it's part of your reaction quiz for this week, you'll see that Wilson's very fair to Germany and all the powers of the war. Essentially, no one country blames the fault of the war. Reparations will be minimal. We go basically back to status quo boundaries before war. There's a lot of give and take. One of the last points, I think it's the last point actually, is a creation of what's called the League of Nations. He says that we need to create a world, basically, organization for the countries to come together and talk. That is the only point, really, of the 14 points that will make it into the Treaty of Versailles. Wilson is greeted as a superhero almost, a celebrity. He's the first sitting president to visit Europe. And what's crazy is, with his celebrity status, he was very, very ineffective of getting anything done at Versailles. The real shakers and movers of this are Lloyd George, I can't remember the French guy, but basically the French and the British drive everything. They are out for blood. They want to do the maximum because they say, we are the victors, we will decide this. The League of Nations will be created, and that's really the only point Wilson gets that he wants. New nations emerge out of this war. Old nations will be changed. It's a very, very harsh document. And then the other part of that, Chapter 19, you're not expected to read all 200 pages of the Treaty of Versailles. If you would like, go for it. Have fun. I have listed probably about 20, 30 pages, and it's not a super long reading, to look through some of the reparations that they put in there. It's harsh. One of the points says, without a doubt, Germany acting unilaterally or whatever is responsible for this basically the whole conflict. Now, Germany was aggressive. They did position themselves to help create the war, but them to blame the sole blame is not fair. Lloyd George persuaded Wilson to agree a clause declaring Germany moral responsible. This is going into Wilson's moral war. And settling on a reparation between $33 billion and $56 billion. Essentially, they set up a payment plan. If Germany had paid for it, I think as it was set up, they would not have paid off the debt until 1990. That's insane. Now, the Wilsonian moment. Wilson, rhetoric of self-determination reverberated across the globe. Many countries wanted independence. The French and the British had no intention of applying this to their own empires. They wanted to maintain their empires, the land that they controlled around the world, but the seed had been planted. Japan's proposal of principle of racial equality will fail. As we talked about Italy and other countries being left out of the spoils of the war, per se, Japan is left out altogether. They're they're not even allowed to negotiate on the treaty. And that's going to really make the Japanese angry. Fast forward a decade, and the Japanese are very formidable in the Pacific, right? They're on a binge to prove themselves. It's one of those what-if moments. That also being said, some of the countries that are going to be done away with, Austria-Hungarian Empire, split up. Now we have the countries of Austria-Hungary. You have the creation of a new country called Poland, out of the skirts of the former Empire of Russia and out of part of the German Empire. Poland is sandwiched between the two. So you can understand why Russian or the Soviet Union and Germans would be mad about the creation of Poland. It's literally taking land from their old countries. The Ottoman Empire, which had been around since the 1400s, dissolved, done away with, and now replaced with a smaller, centralized country known as Turkey, the capital of Ankara. Just to name a few. Drastic changes in Europe are abound. Now the seeds of war to come. Going to 1919-3. Wilson's failure on the 14 points is probably one of his biggest things as a failure as a president. Wilson was a pretty good president. Very smart. Had a PhD, if I remember right. It was Princeton University president. Like very, very smart. Very conservative actually for a Democrat. His failure on 14 Paz caused protests across the Middle East and Asia and the rise of new anti-Western nationalism. And this is really going to hurt the British and the French. So the British and the French had colonies in Africa, Asia, specifically you think about the Middle East like Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, and then to India, to name a few. They want self-determination. They want to be their own countries, and the British and the French say no. So that's going to create Western anti-nationalism that's going to spark a lot of problems, even to this day. If you really want to pinpoint a lot of the Middle Eastern problems, it really derives at this point. The British seized the opportunity to take old Ottoman land, control Iraq, Afghanistan, all that. We're in a mess today. And it really derives at this point. The Ottomans controlled it fairly effectively and kept basically a lid on all the problems. When the Ottoman Empire goes away, well, you can figure it out. The problems arise. The German resentment. The Germans are pissed. They're angry. They can't understand. They thought they were winning this war. Not till the last part of the war did the war actually become real to most Germans with the hunger, etc., the shortages. The Germans thought they were winning this war, so they felt resentment not towards their own government to some degree because they were lied to, but also, why are we being treated as the sole loser? The treaty debate. So Europe ratifies the treaty. Germany's forced to sign it. The treaty comes to the United States. Uh-oh. Congress rejects the treaty entirely. But one of Wilson's brainchilds is part of it. The League of Nations. The United States does not join the League of Nations. We don't ratify the treaty. We make a separate peace with Germany. We never join the League. Instantly, the League, though the United States is not the most powerful country in the world, it is a rising star. We're probably top 5 to 10 countries in the world at this point. Us not being in it, significant. Wilson tried to go around the country to build up support for his treaty. He gets sick, does not pay attention to his health, has a devastating stroke in 1919. We're not talking like a stroke you recover from. We're talking that he lost motor skills, pretty much ineffective the last month of his presidency. Does not run again, obviously, in 1920. Warren G. Harding will run from Ohio. Very conservative Republican. He's going to run on normalcy. Let's get the country back to normal, getting back to what we know. And that's retreating back from the world stage. We got our feet out there in the World War. Now we want to go back to being isolated. We don't care about the world. We don't want... we lost 100,000 men in like 10 months of fighting. We don't want any more bloodshed. Americans do not like blood. So this brings us to the end, up to 1920. As we look at the impact and lasting legacy of World War I, the biggest thing I can take away is it's going to set the stage across Europe for an environment that is ripe for radical ideas, radical leaders, and people seeking not necessarily affirmment, but opportunity. Germany had been devastated. Italy had been scorned. Japan had been all but forgotten. Old European powers, out for their own objectives, are going to inadvertently create the stage for the greatest war the world's ever seen, which is World War II. You have a Germany post-war that is not relegated to a second-rate power, that is giving purpose. They can keep their military. They are not solely blamed for the war. They are helped to be rebuilt and reintegrated with the rest of Europe. Do you think Hitler could have rose in that environment? No. The Nazis would have been chopped off before they were even allowed to live or thrive. So I hope you understand, and as you've taken my other American history class with me when you were juniors, or sophomores I should say, you remember how World War I sets the stage for World War II. I mean, they're inseparable. So as we get into the 20s and looking at how the country is going to basically forget World War I and move on, understand that World War I's shadow, and Wilson knew it before his stroke. He could see it, but many others didn't care. They thought they could get by with this treaty, and they didn't really care about 10, 20 years down the road. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, email me. Test next Monday. Tomorrow we'll get into Chapter 20. Chapter 20 is not on this test. It is Chapter 16, 17, 18, and 19. So 4 chapters for this first test. It is Monday. Study guide is on the classroom. If you have questions or concerns, ask me. Format for the test, just so you know, it's very simple. I pick usually 4 terms from each chapter, and you only have to answer a couple of them. I think it's 2 per chapter. So that's a total of 8 words to define. Then each chapter there is an essay question. There's 2 questions. You pick one of those essay questions. Each of the essay questions is worth, I believe, 10 points. And I'm looking for a good paragraph there, probably 3 to 4 sentences to describe what I'm asking. There's one overall essay question. It's worth 15 points. It should be probably answer all the parts specifically, so maybe a couple paragraphs right there. It's a little bit bigger. And then 25 points for multiple choice. All my tests are 100 points. And that's the description of it. All right, that's all I have. Have a great day. Stay warm.